Case 1. Janine Jones, the pediatric angel of death. 1982. Bexar County Hospital in San Antonio is experiencing a crisis medical staff can't explain. Babies and young children are dying at an alarming rate in the pediatric intensive care unit. Healthy children suddenly crash, their vital signs plummeting without warning. Resuscitation efforts sometimes succeed, sometimes fail, but the pattern is undeniable. Something is catastrophically wrong. At the center of these medical emergencies stands licensed vocational nurse Janine Jones, a woman who seems to have an uncanny ability to be present when children go into crisis. She's often the first to notice when a child is in distress, the first to call for help, the first to begin emergency procedures. To the untrained eye, Janine Jones appears to be a dedicated healthcare professional, perhaps even a hero saving the lives she can. But several doctors and nurses begin noticing something disturbing. The emergencies almost always occur on Janine's shifts. When she takes time off, the pediatric unit is calm. When she returns, the crises resume like clockwork. Janine Jones was born on July 13, 1950, in San Antonio, Texas. Adopted as an infant, she grew up in a middle-class family and eventually pursued nursing. Those who knew her described a woman desperate for attention and recognition, someone who craved the drama and heroics of emergency medicine. She wanted to be the one who saved lives, the one everyone depended on in critical moments. But the truth was far more sinister than anyone initially suspected. September 1982. 15-month-old Chelsea McClellan is brought to a clinic in Kerrville, Texas, where Janine has recently taken a position. The healthy toddler receives routine immunizations and then receives an injection by Janine Jones. Within minutes, Chelsea stops breathing. Despite frantic efforts to save her, the little girl dies. The autopsy reveals Chelsea was injected with a massive dose of succinylcholine, a powerful muscle relaxant causing paralysis and respiratory failure. This drug has no legitimate reason to be in a pediatric clinic, and certainly no reason to be injected into a healthy toddler. The investigation uncovers a horrifying pattern. Authorities begin reviewing deaths and near-deaths that occurred under Janine's care at Bexar County Hospital. They discover she's been systematically injecting children with dangerous substances including digoxin, heparin, and succinylcholine, causing cardiac arrests and bleeding episodes that create medical emergencies. Why would a nurse deliberately harm the very patients she's supposed to protect? Psychologists who evaluate Janine Jones suggest she suffers from Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a psychiatric disorder where a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in those under their care to gain attention and sympathy. Janine craves the adrenaline rush of emergency situations, the praise she receives when she saves a child she actually poisoned, and the attention that comes from being at the center of dramatic life-or-death situations. The full scope of Janine Jones's crimes may never be known. Prosecutors suspect her of killing between 15 and 67 children, though proving each case is difficult due to time elapsed and destruction of medical records. 1984. She's convicted of murder in Chelsea McClellan's death and sentenced to 99 years in prison. She's also convicted of injuring Rolando Santos, another child, with a nearly fatal dose of heparin. The Janine Jones case sends shockwaves through the medical community and leads to significant changes in how hospitals monitor medication access and investigate unusual patterns of patient deaths. It raises disturbing questions about how many other healthcare workers might be hiding in plain sight, using their positions of trust to harm the most vulnerable. Janine Jones is scheduled for mandatory release in 2018 due to Texas sentencing laws at the time of her conviction, but additional charges are filed against her for 5 more murders. She ultimately pleads guilty to the murder of 11-month-old Joshua Sawyer in May of 2017, receiving a life sentence that will keep her behind bars until she dies. Here's what makes this case particularly chilling. Janine Jones worked in healthcare for years before anyone connected the dots. The medical community trusted her. Parents trusted her. She wore scrubs and a friendly smile, and beneath that professional exterior was someone who got a thrill from watching children die. The psychological profile of Janine Jones reveals a woman who needed to be needed. She needed the rush of emergency situations. She needed to be the hero. And when natural medical emergencies didn't provide enough opportunities for heroism, she created them. She manufactured crises so she could swoop in and save the day. But here's the twisted reality. She wasn't saving lives. She was ending them. For every child she rescued, there were others who didn't make it. Children who would have gone home healthy if they'd never encountered Janine Jones. The families she destroyed continue living with unimaginable loss. Parents who brought their sick children to the hospital for help, trusting that medical professionals would heal them, instead watch their children die at the hands of someone wearing a nurse's uniform. The betrayal runs deeper than the murders themselves. These families trusted the system, trusted the hospital, trusted the smiling nurse who said everything would be okay. Medical experts who reviewed the case noted that Janine had access to medications that should have been more carefully controlled. She could walk into a medication room and withdraw powerful drugs without sufficient oversight. The hospital's systems failed on multiple levels, allowing a serial killer to operate freely in a pediatric ward. What's particularly disturbing is how long it took for anyone to act on their suspicions. Several staff members noticed the pattern. More emergencies on Janine's shifts, fewer when she was off. But the culture of the medical profession made it difficult to accuse a colleague of something so heinous. Who wants to believe that a fellow healthcare worker, someone who took an oath to heal, could deliberately harm children? The case also reveals how bureaucratic failures enabled the killing to continue. When Janine was finally asked to resign from Behar County Hospital due to suspicions about her involvement in the unusual number of pediatric deaths, she simply moved to another facility. No charges were filed at that point. No investigation was launched. She was allowed to continue working with children, and more children died as a result. This pattern of moving problem employees rather than confronting them directly is something we see repeatedly in institutional settings. Rather than risk a lawsuit or public scandal, institutions quietly let dangerous individuals move on to harm people elsewhere. In Janine's case, this institutional cowardice had deadly consequences. Today, Janine Jones remains in a Texas prison, a woman who violated the most sacred trust in medicine, to do no harm. She'll die behind bars, and few will mourn her passing. But the children she killed, Chelsea McClellan, Joshua Sawyer, and all the others whose names we may never know, their absence is mourned every single day by families who will never be whole again. The pediatric ward at Behar County Hospital, once a place of healing, became a hunting ground for a predator in scrubs. The lesson from Janine Jones is clear. Evil doesn't always look like we expect it to. Sometimes it wears the uniform we're taught to trust. Case 2. Betty Lou Beets, the Black Widow who buried her husbands. 1983. The quiet community of Gun Barrel City, Texas, is rocked by a missing person report. Jimmy Don Beets, a Dallas Fire Department captain, has vanished without a trace. His wife, Betty Lou Beets, tells authorities her husband simply walked out on her, abandoning their life together without explanation. It's a plausible story. Marriages fall apart every day. Men sometimes leave. But Jimmy Don Beets isn't just any man. He's a responsible fire captain with a solid career, close relationships with colleagues, and no history of impulsive behavior. His sudden disappearance doesn't add up. For 2 years, the case goes cold. Then, 1985. Authorities receive information that will crack the case wide open and reveal one of the most calculating killers in Texas history. Betty Lou Beets was born Betty Lou Dunavant on March 12, 1937, in Roxborough, North Carolina. She grew up during the Great Depression in poverty, and those early years of hardship seemed to shape her view that survival means taking whatever you need, regardless of who gets hurt. By the time she's in her late 40s, Betty Lou has been married 5 times. That alone isn't necessarily suspicious. Plenty of people have complicated romantic histories. But investigators discover Betty Lou's marriages have a disturbing tendency to end in violence and death. Her 5th husband, Jimmy Don Beets, has a life insurance policy. So does her 4th husband, Doyle Wayne Barker, who reportedly drowned in a tragic boat accident in 1981. Betty Lou collects the insurance money and moves on with her life, eventually marrying Jimmy Don. August 1985. Investigators obtain a warrant to search Betty Lou's property in Gun Barrel City. They make a grisly discovery in her front yard, a wishing well that contains far more than pennies and wishes. Buried beneath it is the body of Jimmy Don Beets, wrapped in a sleeping bag. He's been shot twice in the head at close range. The investigators don't stop there. They continue searching the property and find a second body in a storage shed, the remains of Doyle Wayne Barker, Betty Lou's fourth husband, who she claimed drowned. He too has been shot to death. The boating accident was a complete fabrication. The investigation reveals a chilling pattern. Betty Lou Beets has systematically married men, taken out life insurance policies on them, and then murdered them to collect the money. She's manipulated her children into helping her cover up the crimes, enlisting them to help bury bodies and maintain the fiction that her husbands simply left or died accidentally. Think about that for a moment. Betty Lou didn't just murder these men. She turned her own children into accomplices, forcing them to live with the knowledge that their mother was a killer and that they'd helped hide the evidence. The psychological damage extends far beyond the men she killed. During the trial, prosecutors paint a picture of a woman who views marriage as a business transaction and murder as a solution to financial problems. Betty Lou has lived comfortably off life insurance proceeds, showing no remorse for the men she killed. She attempts to manipulate the legal system, claiming abuse and playing the victim, but the physical evidence is overwhelming. Her own children testify against her, describing how she involved them in the cover-ups and how they lived in fear of their mother for years. One daughter describes being forced to help dispose of Jimmy Don's body, carrying the weight of that secret while trying to maintain a normal life. The prosecution's case is methodical and damning. They present evidence that Betty Lou researched how to kill without leaving evidence. They show the jury insurance documents proving she'd financially benefited from every husband's death. They demonstrate that she'd been planning these murders, not acting in self-defense as she claims. Betty Lou's defense team argues she was a battered woman who killed in self-defense. They paint her husbands as abusive monsters and Betty Lou as a victim who finally fought back. But there's a problem with this narrative. You don't bury someone in your front yard and collect their life insurance if you killed them in legitimate self-defense. You call the police. The jury doesn't buy her story. October 1985, Betty Lou Beets is convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. She spends 15 years on death row, continuing to maintain her innocence and claiming she was a victim of abuse. Appeals are filed and rejected. Clemency is sought and denied. February 24, 2000. At the age of 62, Betty Lou Beets is executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas, becoming only the second woman executed in Texas since the Civil War. Her final statement includes no confession, no apology to the families of the men she killed, only claims of innocence that ring hollow in the face of the bodies buried in her yard. She goes to her death maintaining the lie, refusing to give the families even the small comfort of acknowledgement and remorse. Let's talk about what makes Betty Lou Beets particularly disturbing. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a battered woman who snapped after years of abuse and killed in a moment of desperation. This was calculated, premeditated murder for financial gain, repeated multiple times over years. Betty Lou was a black widow in the truest sense. She lured men into marriage, drained them of their resources, and then disposed of them when they were no longer useful. She saw human beings as assets to be liquidated. The investigation revealed she'd been researching her husband's finances before their deaths, calculating exactly how much she stood to gain. She'd timed the murders to maximize insurance payouts. She'd planned disposal methods. This was murder as business plan. What about the men she killed? Jimmy Don Beets was a respected firefighter who dedicated his life to saving others. His colleagues described him as a good man, someone they trusted with their lives. Doyle Wayne Barker had a family who loved him, friends who missed him. These weren't faceless victims. They were real people with real lives that Betty Lou ended for money. The psychological profile of Betty Lou Beets reveals someone completely lacking in empathy. She could look into the eyes of men who loved her, men who'd pledged to spend their lives with her, and pull the trigger without hesitation. She could sleep soundly knowing their bodies were decomposing in her yard. She could cash insurance checks bought with their blood. Her children's testimony was particularly heartbreaking. They described a mother who was cold, calculating, and completely focused on money. They described being forced to participate in covering up murders, living with that guilt and fear for years. They described trying to be normal kids while knowing there were bodies buried in their yard. The case also raises questions about how Betty Lou got away with it for so long. 2 husbands dead, 1 missing. and it took years before anyone connected the dots. Part of this is the era. Domestic violence and spousal abuse weren't taken as seriously in the 70s and 80s as they are now. Part of it is Betty Lou's skill at manipulation. She knew exactly what to say, how to play the victim, how to deflect suspicion. But part of it is also societal assumptions about women. People didn't want to believe a grandmother could be a cold-blooded killer. They didn't want to believe someone who looked so ordinary could be so evil. Betty Lou weaponized these assumptions, using them as camouflage while she murdered with impunity. The case of Betty Lou Beets remains a stark reminder that predators don't always fit our mental image. She was a grandmother, a seemingly ordinary woman who could blend into any community. But beneath that ordinary exterior was a calculating killer who saw human life as nothing more than a means to financial gain. She's dead now, executed by the state of Texas, but the family she destroyed continue living with the loss of fathers, husbands, and brothers who died because one woman valued money more than human life. Case 3. Darlie Routier, a mother accused. June 6, 1996. 2:30 in the morning. The call comes into Rowlett Police Department. A frantic woman is screaming into the phone that an intruder has broken into her home and stabbed her children. Officers race to the upscale neighborhood of Dollrock Heights Edition, expecting to find a home invasion gone wrong. What they find instead becomes one of the most controversial and debated criminal cases in Texas history. Inside the home at 5814 Rowlett Road, officers discover a scene of horror. Two young boys, 6-year-old Devin and 5-year-old Damon Routier, have been brutally stabbed and are beyond saving. Their mother, 26-year-old Darlie Routier, has a slash wound across her throat and injuries to her arms. She claims an intruder attacked them all, that she fought him off, and that he fled through the garage. It seems straightforward. Home invasion, child murder, Darlie Routier as both victim and sole surviving witness. But as investigators process the scene, troubling inconsistencies begin emerging. The physical evidence doesn't match Darlie's account. There's no sign of forced entry. The window screen Darlie claims the intruder cut to get inside shows knife marks that appear to have been made from the inside, not the outside. A bread knife from the Routier kitchen is found in a utility room with blood on it, the likely murder weapon. Most damning, blood evidence suggests Darlie was standing still when her throat was cut, not struggling with an intruder as she claims. Darlie Lynn Peck was born on January 4, 1970, in Altoona, Pennsylvania. She grew up in Lubbock, Texas, and married Darren Routier when she was just 18. By all outward appearances, they're living the American dream. Beautiful home, healthy children, financial success from Darren's business. But beneath the surface, the Routiers are drowning in debt. Their lavish lifestyle has caught up with them. They're facing serious financial difficulties. They've even discussed staging a burglary to collect insurance money. 8 days after the murders, Darlie Routier is arrested and charged with capital murder. The prosecution's theory: Darlie killed her own sons in a moment of rage or as a solution to the family's financial problems, then staged the scene to look like a home invasion, even inflicting wounds on herself to support her story. The evidence presented at trial is extensive. Bloodstain pattern analysis suggests Darlie held the knife that killed her children. Luminol testing reveals bloody footprints and blood cleanup attempts. A sock with blood from both boys is found in an alley behind the house, which prosecutors argue Darlie planted to support her intruder story. Perhaps most controversial is surveillance video from the boys' graveside birthday party, held 8 days after the murders. The video shows Darlie spraying silly string on her sons' graves, smiling and laughing. To many, including the jury, this behavior seems incompatible with a grieving mother. The prosecution uses it to paint Darlie as cold and uncaring. But Darlie's defenders see something different. They argue the video represents a few moments of a much longer, more somber graveside service, that the family was trying to celebrate what would have been Devin's 7th birthday. They point out that grief doesn't follow a script, that judging someone's innocence based on their emotional response is inherently flawed. The trial features intense debate over medical evidence. Darlie's defense team argues her wounds were serious and potentially life-threatening, not superficial self-inflicted injuries the prosecution claims. They suggest an intruder indeed attacked the family, that the investigation focused on Darlie to the exclusion of other possibilities. Let's examine the evidence more carefully, because this case hinges on interpretation of physical evidence and whether you believe Darlie's account or the prosecution's narrative. The prosecution argues Darlie staged everything. The window screen was cut from inside. No intruder entered the home. Darlie killed her boys, then superficially wounded herself to appear as a victim. She planted the sock in the alley to support her intruder story. The silly string video shows she wasn't grieving. The financial motive explains why. They needed insurance money. The defense argues an intruder entered the home and attacked the family. Darlie fought him and was seriously wounded. The investigation was sloppy and focused on Darlie from the start, ignoring evidence of an intruder. The silly string video is taken out of context. Financial problems don't make someone a murderer. The physical evidence can be interpreted in ways consistent with Darlie's account. February the 1st, 1997. After 11 hours of deliberation, the jury convicts Darlie Routier of capital murder of her 5-year-old son Damon. She's sentenced to death. She's not tried for Devin's murder. Texas law allows prosecutors to keep that charge in reserve. Darlie Routier has now spent more than a quarter-century on death row, maintaining her innocence every single day. Her case has become a cause célèbre for those who believe in her innocence, with supporters pointing to potentially mishandled evidence, questions about witness credibility, and advancements in forensic science they believe could exonerate her. DNA testing has been conducted on various pieces of evidence over the years, with results supporters claim support her innocence and prosecutors argue are inconclusive or consistent with guilt. The sock found in the alley contained DNA from both boys, but also unidentified DNA never matched to anyone. Here's where this case becomes particularly complex. What if we're wrong? What if Darlie Routier is actually innocent and has spent 25+ years on death row for crimes she didn't commit? What if an intruder really did enter that home and kill those boys, and we convicted the wrong person based on circumstantial evidence and assumptions about how a grieving mother should behave? Or alternatively, what if Darlie Routier is guilty and has successfully manipulated public opinion for decades, convincing people of her innocence despite overwhelming evidence of her guilt? What if those boys died at their mother's hands and she spent years playing the victim? The truth is, we may never know with absolute certainty what happened in that house on that terrible night. The only people who know for sure are Darlie herself and possibly an intruder who was never caught. Everyone else, jurors, judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, journalists, documentary filmmakers, internet sleuths, we're all interpreting evidence through our own biases and beliefs. What makes someone capable of killing their own children? If Darlie did this, what psychological break occurred that allowed a mother to stab her sleeping sons? The prosecution suggested financial stress, but people face financial stress every day without murdering their children. Was it postpartum depression that had never been properly addressed? Was it a psychotic break? Was it something darker and more calculated? And if she didn't do this, if an intruder really did attack that family, then who was he? Why did he target this particular home? Why did he kill the children but not Darlie or her husband Darren, who was upstairs sleeping? Why has he never been identified despite decades of investigation? The case also raises important questions about forensic science and its role in criminal trials. Blood spatter analysis, which was crucial to the prosecution's case, has come under increased scrutiny in recent years. Experts have questioned whether blood spatter analysis is as scientifically reliable as juries are led to believe. Could the blood evidence have been misinterpreted? The silly string video remains one of the most controversial pieces of evidence. On one hand, it does seem jarring to see a mother spraying silly string and laughing at her murdered son's graves just 8 days after their deaths. On the other hand, people grieve in different ways, and judging someone's guilt based on whether their grief matches our expectations is dangerous territory. The financial motive is similarly problematic. Yes, the Routiers had financial problems. Yes, they discussed insurance fraud. But financial problems are common, and very few people respond to debt by murdering their children. Is financial stress really a sufficient motive to explain a mother stabbing her sleeping children to death? Darlie's supporters point to her injuries as evidence of her innocence. She had a slash across her throat that came within millimeters of her carotid artery. She had defensive wounds on her arms. These weren't superficial scratches. They required medical treatment. Would someone really inflict those injuries on themselves? The prosecution argues yes, that Darlie carefully calculated injuries that would look serious but weren't actually life-threatening. They point out that someone who just murdered her children and is staging a home invasion would need to make herself look like a victim. The sock in the alley remains a puzzle. It contained blood from both boys and was found 75 yards from the house. How did it get there? The prosecution says Darlie ran it out there to plant evidence. The defense says an intruder dropped it while fleeing. Both explanations are possible. Neither can be proven definitively. What about Darren Routier, Darlie's husband? He was upstairs sleeping when the attack occurred and woke to Darlie's screams. He's maintained his belief in his wife's innocence throughout her entire imprisonment. They've since divorced, but Darren still visits Darlie and supports her appeals. Does his continued belief in her innocence mean anything? Or is it possible he simply can't accept that his wife could have done this? The case of Darlie Routier forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about our justice system. We want to believe that juries get it right, that the system works, that innocent people aren't convicted. But we also know that wrongful convictions happen, that forensic science isn't infallible, that human judgment is imperfect. She remains on death row in Texas to this day, her appeals continuing through the courts, her supporters advocating for her release, prosecutors maintaining justice was served. The truth, whatever it may be, lies somewhere in the blood evidence, the witness statements, and the memories of that horrific morning in Rowlett. 2 little boys died that night. That's the one undeniable fact. Devin and Damon Routier never got to grow up, never got to finish school, never got to have families of their own. Their lives were cut brutally short. Whether their mother killed them or whether an unknown intruder did, those boys deserve justice. The question that continues to haunt this case: has justice been served? Case 4. Wanda Holloway, the Texas cheerleader MOM. Channelview, Texas. Early 1990s. The image of Texas cheerleader culture is deeply embedded in American consciousness. Big hair, bigger bows, pyramid formations, and fierce competition. But in this Houston suburb, one mother takes that competition to a level that seems impossible to believe. Wanda Webb Holloway becomes known as the Texas cheerleader mom when her plot to murder the mother of her daughter's cheerleading rival is exposed, revealing the dark underbelly of competitive parenting and the dangerous lengths some people will go to secure what they see as their child's rightful place in the spotlight. This case is notable because, unlike the others we've examined, no one actually dies. But the intent is there, the plan is in motion, and if not for one person's decision to contact authorities, this would be a murder case instead of attempted murder and conspiracy. 1991. Channelview is like many Texas communities. Football and cheerleading aren't just extracurricular activities, they're social currency. Making the cheerleading squad can determine a girl's entire high school experience, her social standing, her confidence, even her future opportunities. Wanda Holloway is obsessed with her daughter Shauna making the cheerleading squad. She was a cheerleader herself in high school, and she sees her daughter's success as validation of her own worth as a mother. But there's a problem. Amber Heath, the daughter of Wanda's former friend Verna Heath, is also trying out for the squad and is considered a strong contender. In Wanda's mind, Amber is the obstacle standing between her daughter and cheerleading glory. And obstacles, in Wanda's worldview, need to be eliminated. What happens next sounds like a plot from a dark comedy, but it's terrifyingly real. Wanda approaches her former brother-in-law, Terry Harper, with a proposal. She wants him to find someone to kill Verna Heath. Her reasoning is both calculated and delusional. If Amber's mother is dead, Amber will be too grief-stricken to try out for cheerleading, clearing the path for Shauna. Think about the logic here. Wanda actually believes that murdering another woman is a reasonable solution to a cheerleading competition. Not just believes it, actively plans it, discusses it, negotiates payment for it. This isn't a fleeting thought or a moment of dark humor. This is a sustained plan to commit murder over pom-poms and pyramid formations. Wanda offers Terry Harper her diamond earrings as payment for arranging the murder. She discusses various scenarios. Should they kill both Verna and Amber? Would killing just Verna be enough? She maps out when Verna will be vulnerable, where the hit can take place, and how to make it look like robbery or random violence. But Terry Harper is horrified by what Wanda is asking him to do. He goes to police and agrees to wear a wire to record his conversations with Wanda. The recordings capture Wanda's voice calmly discussing murder plans, negotiating payment, expressing no remorse or hesitation about ending someone's life. Listen to what these recordings reveal. This isn't someone joking around. This isn't dark humor taken too far. This is a woman methodically planning another woman's murder with the same tone most people use to plan a grocery shopping trip. She's serious. She's focused. She's determined. September the 4th, 1991. Wanda Holloway is arrested and charged with solicitation of capital murder. The case explodes into national news, becoming a symbol of helicopter parenting taken to its most extreme and dangerous conclusion. The media has a field day. Headlines scream about the cheerleader murder plot. Late-night comedians make jokes. Saturday Night Live does sketches. But beneath the absurdity is something genuinely disturbing. A woman who valued cheerleading success more than human life. During the trial, the prosecution presents the recordings, which are damning. In Wanda's own voice, she can be heard planning another woman's murder. The defense argues Wanda was joking, that she never intended to go through with it. But the recordings tell a different story. You can hear her discussing details, working out logistics, being absolutely serious about the plan. The trial reveals a woman consumed by vicarious ambition, someone who has invested her entire sense of self-worth in her daughter's achievements. Psychologists who examine the case suggest Wanda suffers from unhealthy enmeshment with her daughter, unable to separate her own identity from her child's success. This is a pattern we see increasingly in American culture. Parents who live through their children, who see their kids' achievements as their own, who can't accept that their child might not be the best at everything. But most parents who fall into this trap don't plot murder. Wanda Holloway crossed a line that most people can't even comprehend approaching. September 1991. Wanda Holloway is convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison. However, the conviction is overturned on appeal due to jury misconduct. One juror failed to disclose during jury selection that her ex-husband had been represented by the same attorney defending Wanda. 1996. A second trial is held, and Wanda is again convicted of solicitation of capital murder. This time, she's sentenced to 10 years in prison, but is released on probation after serving only 6 months. 6 months. For plotting to murder someone over a cheerleading competition. Let that sink in. The case has far-reaching effects beyond Wanda's conviction. It sparks national conversations about competitive parenting, the pressure placed on children to succeed, and the toxic culture that can develop around activities like cheerleading and youth sports. It becomes a cautionary tale about what happens when parents live vicariously through their children and when winning becomes more important than ethics, morality, or human life. Verna Heath, the intended victim, has to live with the knowledge that someone she once considered a friend plotted her murder over a cheerleading competition. Imagine that. Imagine knowing someone wanted you dead not because of anything you did, but because your daughter might be better at cheerleading than their daughter. Amber Heath has to process the trauma of knowing someone wanted her mother dead, so she would be too sad to perform well at cheerleading tryouts. How do you recover from that? How do you ever look at cheerleading the same way? How do you trust other parents in competitive environments? And Shauna Holloway has to grow up bearing the weight of her mother's actions, forever known as the daughter of the Texas cheerleader mom. Did she even know what her mother was planning? Was this something she wanted? Or was this entirely Wanda's obsession projected onto her daughter? The psychological damage extends far beyond the intended victim. It ripples through families, through the community, through everyone touched by this case. Let's talk about what this case reveals about American culture. We've created a society where children's activities have become battlegrounds for adult egos and ambitions. Youth sports and activities that should be about fun, exercise, learning teamwork, and building confidence have become high-stakes competitions where parents scream at coaches, berate referees, and put immense pressure on their kids to succeed. Wanda Holloway is an extreme example, but she's not an outlier in terms of the underlying pathology. She's just the one who took it to its logical, horrifying conclusion. How many parents are out there right now putting unhealthy pressure on their kids? How many have tied their own self-worth to their children's achievements? How many can't separate their own identity from their child's success? The case also reveals our cultural obsession with cheerleading specifically. In many parts of Texas and the South, cheerleading isn't just an activity. It's a pathway to social status, popularity, and even college scholarships. Making the varsity cheerleading squad can change a girl's entire high school experience. Not making it can feel like social death. Is it any wonder that parents get obsessed? Is it any wonder that the competition becomes cutthroat? We've created a system where the stakes feel impossibly high, where 14-year-old girls are competing not just for spots on a squad, but for their entire social identity. But here's the thing. Even in that context, even with all that pressure and competition, virtually no one responds by plotting murder. Wanda Holloway's response was pathological, not normal. Most parents, even highly competitive ones, maintain enough perspective to recognize that cheerleading isn't worth killing for. So what made Wanda different? What psychological factors allowed her to cross that line? Psychologists suggest Wanda had an unhealthy level of narcissism, seeing her daughter as an extension of herself rather than as a separate person. Shauna's successes were Wanda's successes. Shauna's failures were Wanda's failures. When Amber Heath threatened Shauna's chances of making the squad, Wanda experienced it as a personal attack, a threat to her own identity and status. Wanda also appears to have had a stunted moral development, unable to empathize with others or recognize the inherent value of human life beyond its usefulness to her own goals. Verna Heath wasn't a person with her own hopes, dreams, and family. She was just an obstacle to be removed. The case inspired multiple television movies and remains one of the most bizarre criminal cases in Texas history. It's been the subject of documentaries, books, and countless articles. It's become shorthand for parental over-involvement and competitive culture gone wrong. Wanda Holloway was released from probation and has lived in relative obscurity since, occasionally surfacing in interviews where she expresses regret but also attempts to minimize her actions. In some interviews, she suggested she was just venting frustration, that she never really meant it. But the recordings don't lie. She meant it. The case asks us to examine the culture that produces such distorted priorities. How did we create a society where a mother could believe that making the cheerleading squad was worth committing murder? What does it say about our values when children's activities become battlegrounds for adult egos and ambitions? And perhaps most importantly, how many other Wanda Holloways are out there right now, operating at a slightly lower level of dysfunction, damaging their children and the children around them in ways less dramatic, but still harmful? The Texas cheerleader mom case is unique among the cases we're examining because it represents a different manifestation of female violence, not born of abuse, not motivated by financial gain, but driven by social competition and the distorted belief that her daughter's cheerleading career was worth killing for. It's absurd. It's tragic. It's terrifying. And it's completely, disturbingly real. Case 5. Diana Davis, When Jealousy Turns Fatal. El Paso, Texas, 2004. The city sits at the westernmost tip of Texas, a border city with its own unique culture. This community is about to be rocked by a murder that emerges from the most common of human emotions, jealousy. Diana Davis is a 32-year-old woman living in El Paso, working as a medical assistant, by all appearances living a normal life. But Diana has a problem that will ultimately lead to murder. She's obsessively jealous of her ex-boyfriend's new relationship. Diana dated Marcus Johnson for 2 years before their relationship ended in 2003. The breakup is difficult for Diana, who struggles to move on even as Marcus begins dating someone new. 24-year-old Jennifer Sanchez, a teacher at a local elementary school. Diana can't accept that Marcus has moved on. She begins stalking Jennifer, showing up at her workplace, driving by her home, sending threatening messages. Jennifer reports the harassment to police, and Diana is warned to stay away, but the warnings only seem to intensify her obsession. June 15, 2004. Evening. Jennifer Sanchez leaves her school after staying late to prepare for the next day's classes. She walks to her car in the parking lot, unaware that Diana Davis is waiting for her. Witnesses report hearing shouting, then gunshots. Diana has confronted Jennifer in the parking lot, and when Jennifer tries to get into her car and drive away, Diana pulls out a handgun and shoots her multiple times through the car window. Jennifer manages to call 911, gasping out that she's been shot and giving the dispatcher Diana's name before losing consciousness. By the time paramedics arrive, Jennifer Sanchez is dead at the scene. Diana Davis flees, but is apprehended several hours later attempting to cross the border into Mexico. She has the murder weapon in her possession and gives a full confession to police, claiming she only meant to scare Jennifer but lost control when Jennifer tried to drive away. The investigation reveals Diana purchased the gun 2 weeks before the murder and had been planning the confrontation. Text messages and emails show an escalating pattern of threats and obsessive behavior. Diana has convinced herself that if she can't have Marcus, no one can, and that Jennifer is the obstacle that needs to be removed. Think about the psychology here. Diana wasn't in a relationship with Jennifer. Jennifer hadn't done anything to Diana. Jennifer's only crime was falling in love with someone who happened to have previously dated Diana. That's it. That's what cost her her life. This is the dark side of romantic obsession. Diana couldn't let go. She couldn't move on. She couldn't accept that the relationship was over. And rather than doing the healthy thing, processing her feelings, maybe seeking therapy, eventually finding someone new, she fixated on the new girlfriend as the reason she couldn't have Marcus. It's a pattern we see repeatedly in domestic violence and stalking cases. The abuser or stalker can't accept that they're no longer in control. They can't accept that the other person has moved on. So they escalate, they threaten, and sometimes they kill. During the trial in 2005, prosecutors paint Diana as a calculated killer who stalked her victim and executed a premeditated murder. The defense attempts to argue Diana acted in heat of passion, that she didn't intend to kill Jennifer but panicked in the moment. The jury doesn't buy it. The evidence of planning, the purchase of the gun, the stalking behavior, the multiple shots fired, all point to intentional murder. September the 20th, 2005. Diana Davis is convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. Jennifer's family delivers emotional victim impact statements, describing a vibrant young woman who loved teaching, who had her whole life ahead of her, who died simply because she had the misfortune of falling in love with someone whose ex-girlfriend couldn't let go. Jennifer's mother speaks about the granddaughter she'll never have, the wedding she'll never attend, the life her daughter will never live. Jennifer's father talks about the phone call that shattered his world, learning his little girl was dead in a school parking lot. Jennifer's sister describes the hole in her life that will never be filled. Marcus Johnson, the ex-boyfriend at the center of the case, struggles with guilt and grief. He'd broken up with Diana because of her possessive and controlling behavior, but he'd never imagined she was capable of murder. He has to live with the knowledge that his relationship with Jennifer made her a target. Here's what haunts Marcus. Should he have seen this coming? Were there signs he missed? Could he have done more to protect Jennifer? These are questions that will torment him for the rest of his life. Even though rationally, he knows Diana's actions aren't his fault. Diana Davis remains in prison, where she will spend the rest of her life. Her case is a stark reminder that domestic violence and intimate partner violence don't always follow traditional patterns. Diana wasn't Jennifer's partner. She was the ex-partner of Jennifer's boyfriend, but the dynamics of control, obsession, and jealousy are the same. The case also highlights the limitations of the legal system in protecting stalking victims. Jennifer reported Diana's harassment. She did everything right. She told police. She documented the threats. She tried to get help. But beyond warning Diana to stay away, there was little police could do until a crime was committed. By the time that crime occurred, it was too late. This is one of the most frustrating aspects of stalking cases. The system often can't intervene effectively until violence has already occurred. Restraining orders are pieces of paper that don't stop bullets. Warnings to stay away rely on the stalker's compliance. Victims are told to document everything, report everything. But they're also told there's not much that can be done until the stalker actually commits a crime. Jennifer Sanchez documented everything. She reported everything. She died anyway. What should we have done differently? How do we protect people from obsessed ex-partners and stalkers? These are questions without easy answers. We can't arrest people for thoughts or feelings, only for actions. We can't lock someone up indefinitely because their ex is afraid of them, even if that fear is justified. But we also can't keep watching victims like Jennifer Sanchez die while we wring our hands about the limitations of the legal system. There has to be a better way to intervene, to protect, to prevent. Some jurisdictions have implemented threat assessment teams that evaluate stalking cases and develop safety plans. Some have created specialized stalking units in police departments. Some have strengthened stalking laws and enhanced penalties. But these measures are inconsistent across jurisdictions and often underfunded. Diana Davis's case also reveals something about the psychology of obsessive love. Psychologists who study romantic obsession note that it often stems from deep insecurity and fear of abandonment. The obsessed person can't tolerate the feeling of rejection, so they fixate on the ex-partner or the new partner as the source of their pain. Diana couldn't accept that Marcus had chosen to leave. She couldn't tolerate the idea that he preferred Jennifer to her. So she created a narrative where Jennifer was the villain, the homewrecker, the reason Diana couldn't be happy. Never mind that Marcus had left Diana before he met Jennifer. Never mind that Jennifer hadn't done anything wrong. In Diana's distorted worldview, Jennifer was the problem. This cognitive distortion is common in stalkers and abusers. The inability to accept responsibility for the relationship ending. The need to blame someone else. The fixation on removing obstacles rather than addressing their own issues. If Diana had sought therapy instead of buying a gun, Jennifer would still be alive. If Diana had processed her feelings of rejection and abandonment in healthy ways, Jennifer would still be teaching elementary school students. If Diana had accepted that relationships end and people move on, Jennifer would still have a future. But Diana made different choices. She chose obsession over healing. She chose stalking over letting go. She chose murder over moving on. And Jennifer Sanchez paid the price for Diana's inability to accept reality. The case serves as a warning. Jealousy is a normal human emotion, but what we do with that jealousy determines whether we're healthy or dangerous. Most people experience jealousy and work through it. They feel the sting of rejection and eventually heal. They see their ex with someone new and feel sad or angry or hurt, but they don't act on those feelings in destructive ways. Diana Davis couldn't make that distinction. For her, feeling jealous meant acting on that jealousy. Feeling rejected meant punishing the person she blamed for that rejection. Feeling hurt meant inflicting hurt in return. The tragedy is how preventable this was. At multiple points, Diana could have made different choices. She could have sought help. She could have walked away. She could have channeled her energy into healing rather than harming. Instead, a young teacher is dead, buried before she ever got to live the life she dreamed of. And Diana Davis will spend the rest of her life in prison, her obsession having cost her everything and having destroyed 2 families in the process.